Meeting will please come to order. This is a regular meeting of the Board of Trustees of the Village of Wilmette. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Running you over. Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. As I said, this is a regular meeting of the Board of Trustees of the Village of Wilmette. We'll call the matters in the order in which they appear on the printed agenda, and there are copies of the agenda on the table by the door. So you may want to have one so you can follow along to see when your matter will be called. Now, if you plan to address us tonight, we ask you please come up to the podium. Please speak into the microphone and tell us who you are and where you live, as that may be relevant to the matter at hand. We ask that you speak clearly into the microphone so we can hear you, and because everything you say and everything we say is recorded. And from those recordings, minutes of the meeting are prepared, and these minutes are available both at Village Hall in hard copy form and also on our website at wilmette.com. Also, our Village Board meetings are televised on Local Access Channel 6 and on the Internet. And if you look up, you can see the cameras in the room. The one in the back with the red light on is the one that's active. By televising our meetings, we make it easy for our neighbors in the community to follow the proceedings of the Village Board, see the types of matters that come before us, the policies that we create, the questions that we ask, and the business that we conduct. You can find archived videos of Village Board and other local government meetings on our website at wilmette.com. I'd like to personally thank all the residents who regularly tune into Channel 6 and pay attention to the workings of their local government. Now, before each meeting, the board receives a packet of agenda materials, and these materials are also posted on our website on the Friday before our meetings. So that way, residents and any other interested parties can review the very same materials that the board members receive. This week's packet contained 273 pages. Now, we've had an opportunity to review all the information in the agenda packet, so if you do plan to address us tonight, we ask that you tell us the most relevant, most material, the most important points that you really want us to focus on. Finally, we are a community of neighbors, and as such, we want our meetings to be as civil and courteous as possible. So at this time, I would ask people to turn off their cell phones and other devices. And while we're turning off our phones, Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Trustee Wolf? Here. Trustee Sullivan?
Here.
Trustee Plunkett? Here. Trustee Dodd?
Here.
Trustee Kurzman?
Here.
Trustee Leonard?
Here.
President Blinsky?
Here. So we're all here. We obviously have a quorum then. Next item on the agenda is item 2, public comment. During public comment, we ask if there's any member of the audience who would like to address the board on a matter which is not on the agenda. Members of the audience may address the board on matters which are on the agenda when that particular matter is called. So is there any member of the audience who would like to address the board on an item which is not on the agenda? May I see a show of hands? Yes. Welcome.
Everybody. This is, my name is Jan Barshas. I live at 1500 Sheridan Road, apartment 5E. Lived in Wilmette for as long as I've lived, practically. This is in regard to the stormwater utility fee. Go Green Wilmette supports the creation of a stormwater utility fee to finance any of the improvements proposed in the Stormwater Action Plan. Our understanding is that the stormwater utility fee would base a residence fee on the amount of impervious surface on their property, which makes good sense for long-term management of stormwater. By creating an incentive for homeowners to maintain pervious surfaces, the utility fee would encourage the entire community to contribute to the solution rather than exacerbate the problem. Such an incentive would have positive implications well beyond installing sewer pipes. Thank you for all your hard work on this really difficult issue. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes, sir. Welcome.
Good evening. Thank you. My name is David Furster. I'm a resident of Wilmette, have been for 12 years, and I'm here to represent the Wilmette Community Solar Project, which is a small group of citizens that's gotten together to try to build a solar installation for the residents of Wilmette and surrounding communities. The idea is that we will build a 2-megawatt facility somewhere in the ComEd area under the auspices of the Future Energy Jobs Act of Illinois, which was recently passed. And anyone in Wilmette can subscribe to the project and get their power from the solar installation at a reduced rate relative to the ComEd current rates, and at a rate that's fixed for the life of the contract. There's no upfront investment that's required for subscribing. All you have to do is agree to take your power from the project for the life of the contract. And we hope that to get the interest of anybody in Wilmette who's interested in supporting renewable energy and solar energy in particular. And any support we can get from the residents would be appreciated. More information can be found at wilmettecommunitysolar.org. And we look forward to hearing from people who have an interest in this sort of thing. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else? Okay, we'll move on to item 3, which is the consent agenda. As described on the printed agenda, items which are routine business that are not normally debated by the village board are placed on the consent agenda. And all items beginning with the number 3 are on the consent agenda. So tonight, that means that if you start on page 1 with item 3.1, it's all of the items on page 2, and then the first 2 items on page 3 ending with item 3.15. Items on the consent agenda are up for approval tonight, and if an item is not removed by a member of the audience and is not removed by one of the trustees, it will be approved and it will not be discussed. So let me begin by asking, is there any member of the audience who would like to remove an item from the consent agenda? May I see a show of hands? Okay, seeing none, moving on. Any items that any of the trustees would like to remove from the consent agenda? Okay, may I have a motion to adopt the consent agenda?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Madam Clerk, please call the roll on the motion to adopt the consent agenda.
Trustee Wolf.
Aye.
Trustee Sullivan.
Aye.
Trustee Plunkett.
Aye.
Trustee Dodd.
Aye.
Trustee Kurzman.
Aye.
Trustee Leonard.
Aye.
President Blinsky.
Aye. So the motion carries. The consent agenda has been adopted. If you are here for an item on the consent agenda, it was just approved. And I will clarify for the people who are here tonight, again, all the items beginning with the number 3 have been approved, and that includes Land Use Committee item 3.5 and Land Use Committee item 3.6. So if you were here for one of those 2 items, it's been approved. There'll be no further discussion of those items or any of the other items on the consent agenda. So you are free to leave, of course, more than welcome to stay. And I don't see anybody leaving, but if anybody does leave early, there's plenty of time to stop by one of our downtown restaurants before you head home, so please do that. Next item on the agenda is item 4, report of officers, and we'll start with the report from our village manager, Mr. Frenzer.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just 2 items of business. First, I'd like to advise the board that, as you'll recall, you asked us to have Stantec, our consultant on the stormwater program, prepare phasing options for the board's review prior to trying to make some decisions in April. We've been advised by the engineering department that they are wrapping that up and will be available and expect to attend the village board meeting on February 27th. So that would be our next meeting. And they will be here for the purpose of answering those questions that the board had. So we will also be giving notice to the community and all the people who are on our email list to let them know that Stantec will be with us at the next board meeting. That's on February 27th. Finally, I'd just like to take a moment to thank not only the community, but in particular our Public Works Department employees. It's been a very hard winter so far for both the residents and especially for the staff that has had to deal with the problems. If you recall, after a fairly warm and wet December, we went into a severe period of 3 weeks of intense cold where the temperature didn't get above 19 degrees, and that led to scores of water main breaks around town. After that, we had repeated icing events that had to be dealt with, and we've just concluded 9 consecutive days of measurable snowfall, which was a all-time record. We had 17 inches fell over the weekend here in Wilmette. The crews, to give you some sense of the scope, needed 86 tons of salt and over 1,300 gallons of de-icer just to treat the streets over this weekend. They've put in a very hard time, and I very much appreciate receiving the compliments from residents. We share those with all the employees, and it means a very great deal to them. And we appreciate the residents' patience also with us in terms of doing getting the streets and sidewalks cleared and the inconvenience that comes with things like having to shovel the driveway apron back out after the snowplow goes by. But as I said, I would like to thank the Public Works crews. They've had a very tough winter. And for the residents who wave to them when they go by, or who actually brought them coffee when they're working on water main breaks, how very, very much they appreciate it and how very much they're touched by it. That's all.
Thank you, Mr. Frenzer. Next report is from our Corporation Counsel, Mr. Stein.
No report tonight, Mr. Mayor.
Next item on the agenda is item 5, which is the report of the Liquor Control Commissioner. There's no report tonight. So we'll move on to item 6, which is our standing committee reports. Item 6.1 is our Land Use Committee. Trustee Leonard.
I'd like to move for the approval of item number 6.11, Zoning Board of Appeals case, report case 2018-Z-2, 3730 Lake Avenue.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. This item comes to us with a negative recommendation from the Zoning Board of Appeals, so we'll need 5 votes tonight to overturn the recommendation of the Zoning Board. We're actually going to, we're trying a slightly different process here tonight, so I'm going to ask Mr. Adler, our Director of Community Development, to first approach the podium to frame the item for us and summarize it, and then we will ask the applicant to come up forward.
This is a request for a 7.11 side yard air conditioner setback variation. That's to permit the retention of an air conditioner that was moved from a conforming location to the side of the home, and a 3.0-foot side yard setback variation and a 3-foot separation variation to permit the retention of a grill island and pergola that's located to the rear of the existing house. The primary question for the village board to consider tonight is, does the requested variations, do they meet the standards of review for approval? If the village board finds yes, that the standards have been met and the variations are approved, staff should be directed to assess an appropriate settlement amount for performing the work without a permit. If the answer is no and the variation standards aren't met and the variations are denied, staff will need to ensure compliance with the zoning code. A permit would be required for any new work, including the relocation of the grill island and the air conditioners. Staff maintains the authority to enforce the code through the Corporation Counsel's office.
Any questions for Mr. Adler? I mean, obviously he'll be here. He's not going anywhere. But regarding this slide.
Just regarding the air conditioner, do you have any idea of how many of these requests have come before us in the last year or two where we've asked for this variation and it's either denied or granted?
There are a lot of administrative requests that come to staff, and that would be if there's a minimum of 5 feet between the air conditioner and the property line. My guess is a majority of those are probably granted. I don't know the percentage.
But aren't those mostly replacements or all replacements?
A lot of times they're replacements, correct. A lot of times they might want to add a unit right next to the existing, or be removing one unit and be putting 2 units back in. But sorry, I don't know the number of requests that have come to
This would have had to come before the zoning board anyway.
Would, because it's less than 5 feet and would not have been eligible for administrative variation.
Well, let me while we're on this topic, is it within the scope of the administrative process to approve the relocation of an air conditioner from a conforming location to a non-conforming location?
It could be, depending on what the reasoning is. I'm not saying it would be granted. Those chances are probably less than, obviously, somebody who's just looking to replace a unit in the same location.
And in that administrative process, there's a notice provision, right?
Correct.
So you notice residents within how close?
The adjoining properties, and if a person on an adjoining property objects, then it goes to the zoning board, and then the village board is a full variation.
Okay. Trustee Dodd?
I just want to make
sure I understood your question, President Belinsky. So if it's an administrative request such that the variance is less than 5 feet, it still goes through a notification process regardless?
It does.
Okay.
It does go through a notification process. So any interested, potentially impacted neighbor would have an opportunity to object.
And do we only have this administrative kind of, is there a handful of other types of variances like this that are administrative because they're just?
There are a
Do you want to give the history of that? Because that really is sort of 10 years ago or so that
Sure.
the board made the changes.
Yeah, we started, we created the administrative variation process to ease the load on the Zoning Board of Appeals and ultimately the Village Board. And it started out, the first items that were eligible for administrative review were swimming pools. Swimming pools and spas used to be a special use, a full special use that would go to the Zoning Board and the Village Board. Now, pools and spas are items that go to staff, and if staff makes the determination that the standards are met and nobody objects via the notification process, the permit could be issued. Air conditioners were among the first administrative variations we started granting. It's been expanded to include second floors over existing first floors, porches, replacement porches that are not encroaching any further than an existing porch. I believe there were between 30 and 40 administrative variations reviewed by staff in 2017, and those would have been 30 to 40 additional variations that would have gone to the Zoning Board of Appeals. A lot of those, again, have to do with additions that routinely the variation would have been granted. Again, it might be going above a existing first floor or carrying the same line of an existing home, not meeting a combined side yard setback or something like that.
And the idea was, when the staff did the research, that these were variations that were granted basically automatically, 100% of the time. So rather than go through a process where the result was going to be the Zoning Board and the Village Board was going to grant it, delegate that authority to the staff to make it easier on the boards, commissions, and most importantly, the residents who didn't have to go through the whole process. And Dan, you were chair of the Zoning Board back then.
And that's what I wanted to echo. I mean, I get ease the Zoning Board. It really was for finding it. And that was why my question, because I think actually one of the zoning members said, or asked that question, if we're approving this so often, should we go back and look at the code and either make it administrative or change our code?
Right.
And I think that's a fair statement, so we can give a better experience to the residents. I mean, it's faster, especially if they're replacing it.
No, and in particular, we just did redo the zoning code.
Right.
And the decision was made not to change the setback restrictions for an air conditioner.
Right.
And you were involved in that process when you part of your zoning board process.
So just as a follow-up, just so I understand, so under the administrative review, if the setback is less than 5 feet for an air-conditioned unit, then that would be considered an administrative review. So it's really not a variance.
If the variation was if the air conditioner was set at least 5 feet from the property line, it would have been eligible for administrative relief.
This one isn't, though. This one's only 3 feet.
Not.
More than 5 feet.
Because it's 3 feet from the line instead of 5.
Property line, not 5 feet.
Too close.
It's too close.
Yeah.
Right.
But even if it is that within, it's still a variation. It just doesn't go through the normal
Correct,
process.
correct,
Doesn't go
correct,
through the zoning board
yes,
in this
yes.
process.
I might not have spoken
Right,
correctly,
and typically we would see the requests come up when people were doing additions, that's typically when we would see the air conditioning requests, and then we have to look at how it's impacting the neighbors, and is it actually a better location than what might be a conforming unit.
Trustee
Doesn't
Plunkett.
go to the administrative review, but in terms of the time, I know there's no statute of limitations, but this seems an unusual case in that the air conditioners were installed 6 years ago. Have we had other cases where we've reviewed, a lack of permit for that span of time, and what's been the outcome?
I'm sure there have been. I don't recall off the top of my head what the outcome would have been. A lot of times it turns out that the actual unit that was installed might have been conforming. We sometimes get information on work that was done without a permit, and the work ends up being conforming. But it's not. I wouldn't say it's typical to see something that's 5 to 6 years old come before us, because at that point usually there's no record of usually nobody's going to really know when it was changed and that it was in a conforming location before.
Okay. So again, Mr. Adler's not going anywhere, but we'll ask you to sit down now, and I will ask the applicant to come forward, please.
John, go to the next slide.
Okay, so welcome. The members of the village board have reviewed the materials that were in the packet, so they're familiar with the work that was done. And in your presentation, please feel free to take a few minutes to describe the project, but if you could focus your comments on addressing the concerns that were raised by the zoning board, that would be helpful. So the zoning board made a negative recommendation. They found that the work that was done did not meet all of the standards of review. And the standards of review, which they're a little small up above us, but those are the standards of review that are found in Section 5.4.f of the zoning code. So for each zoning case, the zoning board finding of fact are found in Section 7 of their report. And in your case, that's pages 21 and 22 of the zoning board report, which for anybody who has the PDF, it's pages 224 and 225. And I'm going to read the findings for your case so that it's all right up in front, that everybody knows what the real question is. So the findings of fact upon which decision was based, a majority of the Zoning Board of Appeals finds that the request does not meet the variation standards of Section 5.4.f of the zoning ordinance. Specifically, there's no conditions of the property that are creating a hardship. There's nothing unique about the property that is different from the other properties in the neighborhood. There's no hardship of the property that is preventing the owners from making reasonable use. So those are the first 4 or 5 sentences. So clearly the zoning board was concerned about hardship, which I believe that's D, right? Which says the difficulty or hardship resulting from the application of the zoning ordinance would prevent the owner from making a reasonable use of the property. However, the fact that the property could be utilized more profitably with the variation than without the variation is not considered as grounds for granting the variation. So all that said, in your comments to us, please make sure that you cover what the zoning board said, and basically tell us why you think we should disagree with what the zoning board said. Okay, the floor is yours. Welcome.
I'm Mina Baruta, 3730 Lake Avenue. My husband's Steve Baruta. In regards to the AC unit, we were replacing an AC unit that was stopped working essentially when we moved into the home. And when North Star Air and Heating came out, they had recommended moving it to the side of the home and saying that it would be more efficient that way with how the lines were and where they would go into our home. I know he was traveling for work. I was home at the time, and it was a hot summer day. We went forward with it, assuming that we didn't know that there was a setback requirement on the side of the house, and assuming that they knew what they were talking about, and that was our negligence and our mistake for not knowing all the details. The AC unit has been in place for over 6 years. There's a 6-foot tall fence that helps deflect any potential noise. It's under our kitchen window, so we spend a lot of time as a family in the kitchen, and we don't hear it. And we live on Lake Avenue, which is a very busy street that would also drown out any noise that the AC makes. In the last board meeting, the board had asked the neighbor, in the past 5 years, has this been an issue? Has this been a hindrance in any way? She had replied that it is not. And so that is the issue with the AC. In regards to the grill island, that was done at the same time as our paver patio replacement in the backyard. That's also been in place for 5 years. It's our understanding now that we've learned that the permit that we had applied didn't cover that, or that we needed to provide additional information that would have outlining the grill. But again, the inspector had come out 2 different times, so we were under the impression that everything was fine. So we weren't aware of that either. It was also asked if that was a visual issue in any way, or if that was an issue to our neighbor. She had replied that it was not as well. In regards to the pergola, there was some discussion amongst the board around the pergola. And again, I didn't realize that they were going to either approve the entire request as a package. At the time, I thought potentially they can make a decision on one thing and maybe a different decision on the other. So it's my understanding you guys reviewed it as a package as well. So I know because the board had a lot of discussion around that pergola piece, we'd be willing to even withdraw and not complete the pergola over the grill because of their concern, and we don't want the appearance in any way to negatively impact our neighbor. But so we're asking for the Board of Trustees to just look at the AC and grill if possible. In terms of a hardship right now, to move it would be a financial hardship. We did provide a proposal. I don't know if it was in the packet or not. I have a copy of to be able to move the AC and the lines and the grill would be estimated about $8,950, not to exceed $12,500 in terms of the hardship we would endure now with having to move it being 5 years.
So with regards to hardship, the question isn't what it would cost to fix it. The question is, what was the hardship that we should allow it? In other words, what was unique about your property that you should be able to move your air conditioner from the back in a conforming location to the side, and that that there's a hardship that you have to be closer to the lot line than you normally would be?
Yeah, and the only thing, I mean, the main thing is when we had it moved, they talked about the efficiency being closer. The stack is right there. And the other thing was the noise. We live on Lake Avenue. Lake Avenue is very noisy. We spend almost none of our time in the front yard. We spend all of our time in the backyard. The original location of the AC was literally smack dab in the patio. We live on the golf course, so it's nice, it's peaceful and quiet. So when they brought up to move it around the side, it just kind of made sense.
And to be honest, if we knew that there was an issue, and again, that was our not doing our due diligence, I don't know if we would have even come to the board to ask for a variance request. I assumed with them offering that was okay. So again, I didn't think about it again after that happened, and it's been 5 years, so.
Yeah, and it's actually quite the contrary, that oftentimes, I'm speaking for staff here, but people come in and say, we'd like to not have the air conditioner in the backyard, and sort of the response is, well, everybody would like to not have the air conditioner in the backyard, and given the side yard, you're imposing on your neighbors instead. So it's very rare. I mean, Mr. Adler can answer the question, but I don't recall in my 7 years on the board, and Trustee Sullivan, maybe is your time on the zoning board, I don't ever recall approving an air conditioner moving from a conforming rear location to a side location, unless it was a replacement. That was it, and that's not the case when you're moving from conforming to side yard.
Since we've redone it, I don't remember any.
And again, my point was saying I wouldn't even come with that if I would have known that there was a requirement. And this being our first home, we lived in the city before. Again, I know not that negligence.
Right, or in the alternative, we would have said, is there a way to put it in the front yard? Right, it's noisy anyway in Lake. I don't know what the rules are. We would have come to ask what can we do, if anything, right? Versus just taking their word for it and moving.
Right.
So.
I mean, I think you talked about, hey, it may have been more of the electronic, like you said, if there was an efficiency, or was it close to the electric panel, or did you need it for some reason because that's where your equipment was? That might have been the hardship, where it just wasn't efficient for you or more expensive for you to run it from rear yard, wherever you're.
But you had one in a conforming location already. That's the thing. Yeah. So can I ask you?
My question. So if it's a replacement of one in a non-conforming location, how did those get approved in the first place?
Because the pipes are already run.
Yeah.
So you had to run new pipes.
By permit. Oh, I see.
You had to write. So in other words, if you've had an air conditioner there, it was built there before there was a restriction on it.
Got it.
So we call that legal non-conforming.
Okay.
We would have had to run new pipes anyway because it's a newer, more efficient. So it does the R or whatever it is. So they would have had to rerun new pipes anyway.
Right,
That's what they were telling us too.
Right, to the backyard. There's no difference. Maybe it's slightly shorter.
Right.
But again, the cost isn't considered a factor. So let me ask you: there are a number of. You did get a permit for a tree removal.
Yes.
Yeah, we were told.
When When did that happen? Was it before or after the air conditioner?
After, probably.
Well, we got two. So I
We've
don't
had a
know.
couple of trees removed.
Yeah, I don't know. No, one would have been before. Because it was in the patio.
Oh, the one
Yeah,
in
the
back.
evergreen, yeah, the one in the back.
And then when you were doing the patio, you didn't get a permit to start with.
Right.
Work
because-
was stopped. Somebody said you need a permit.
Right, because we had paver patios in the backyard already that were sinking, and so we were replacing them. So again, all of these things, the AC and the patio, were all happening at the same time. And I think it was the first thing we've ever done at the house. And so then someone came out and said, "Oh no, you still need a permit, even though you have pavers and patios and you're replacing it. You still need a permit." And they had come out, and so we had gone to then apply for the permit. So I brought what they said I needed was the plat of survey and then a check to pay for what the permit cost would be based on the work. And so that's what we had brought.
But that work didn't include the air conditioner.
No, because that was a separate issue, right? No, that didn't, because it was a different company. North Star did it. Right, yeah.
Right, and it also didn't include the work on the grill. It was just the patio.
I assumed it was, the grill was there. It was already, the footers were.
Well, it would have been on your permit application. What did your permit application say?
I don't think we even did a permit application.
We went in
We
and
submitted,
paid.
we paid a check, was a percentage of the
Well,
cost of the work.
I filled out paperwork
Oh.
when I went in. You were out of town. I filled out.
Right, we've actually got your...
I filled out, and they
Yeah, all the
said to
permits,
put in
yeah.
there that I'm replacing the patio.
Who did the patio work? You said North Shore did your, who did your patio work?
No, North Star did the AC.
Looks like it was National Brick Patios. I'm looking at the,
National
I'm
Brick
looking at the permit that they put in.
Who first alerted you that you needed a permit for the patio? How did that happen?
Apparently, one of the village engineers was playing golf. We live on a golf course.
Yeah.
And saw the work being done.
So came
and
by.
Came and knocked on the door the next day.
Yeah.
At that point, had you already started building the grill?
Yeah, it was all, I mean, they were ripping out the old pavers, and they were doing the gravel.
The grading.
And they poured the footers for
wall?
the steps. So we have two back steps, and they poured the footers for the steps and the grill. Yeah. So it was already in progress.
Right, and the permit application, if I can read your writing, says, replacement of existing paver patio and walkway with new pavers, patio at grade, already received something by,
Whatever the person that came out to our home told me to. put
already
down.
already reviewed on site by Bill.
Yeah. that's
So
what
it doesn't
about.
mention the grill in the application.
Right. I
You know, a lot of times when the zoning board or the village board are in these situations, the question we ask ourselves is, if you had come to us before, would we have said yes? And the basis for that are the variation standards, and the main one being the hardship. And, you know, so I guess I'm asking again in terms of, let's assume you hadn't done any of the work yet. What would your case be for the hardship for building the grill as close as you did to the property line or moving the air conditioner?
We wouldn't have had one,
I
though,
wouldn't
because
have
if we
done
would have
it.
came to get it done, we would have moved it three
If
more
I-
feet
right.
to be conforming.
That's
I mean,
where our
the thing
issue
is, it was
is.
already started, and we didn't know, and we got the permit,
Right.
didn't include the stuff, and that's kind of where
Yeah,
we're.
so unfortunately,
So we would have moved it. I mean, it wouldn't have been non-conforming
Right.
had we come
and now,
and knew all the details that we needed
Right,
to do
that we
in the
know
first
now.
place.
Okay.
yeah.
Questions for the applicant? Trustee Leonard?
About the pergola. Now, you say you're willing to walk away from that. Tell me about that project.
So we had existing two, and I think there's photos in there, but we had two existing kind of, they're not really even pergolas, they're just
Yeah.
little things above the back sliding glass doors. When we bought the house, and they were just built in like pressure-treated lumber, and they were kind of rotting and falling down. We've got two little kids, so I decided to take them out and just put new ones up. So at the same time we were putting the new ones up, I thought I'd add one over the grill to make it look nice. So right now, when our neighbor called, it's about halfway done. So right now it just has the side poles in it, and none of the top is really built yet. So
Yeah, we're just saying we're willing to not move forward if that is an issue for the request.
I have a question too. So I am looking at this permit that you probably haven't looked at since August
Right.
2012. Did you fill that out at the Village Hall or at home?
No, I went that same day to the Village Hall, and he told me.
Okay. And did you fill this out with somebody's help? Did somebody
No,
go through it with you?
No.
Okay.
No, I just, whatever, I guess you said there was a person's name was Bill. I don't know what I wrote on there. Whoever came and talked to me told me go and fill this out, say that you're replacing the existing paver patio and pay the permit fee. And so that's what I did.
Okay. Just because I'm looking at some of the language, it says patio at grade. It doesn't
That's
sound
what
like a
they told-
layperson
right. I wouldn't have-
know how to write.
And I was out of town, so it was.
It's whatever he told me to write, I wrote it.
Okay.
But did it
I have a
occur to you
question
to
on the
ask a
permit.
question about, like, do I need any other permits
Right.
while I'm here?
No, because we
Well,
figured
we
the
thought
guy
that
came
was
out
covering the
and he saw the
patio
backyard.
and the grill, and
I mean-
I thought that was covering it.
Yeah.
I mean, he was out there, so I guess,
He would have said, ask
Right.
for the grill or ask for this or ask, and then just kind of said, go get a permit.
But it's, I mean, he didn't do a full inspection of your house, and he could have assumed that, you know, he didn't see your air conditioner, he didn't, and, you know, I'm struggling a little bit with
No, so with
somebody
that
said, hey,
point,
you know, you need
AC
a permit for the patio.
AC was moved before he came out for the paver patio, right? I mean, like a
Right,
couple
but
weeks,
but
probably.
there's lots of people that have them on the side of their house because they're legal non-conforming. They've been there for 30 years before it was against the rules. So
Okay.
you certainly couldn't expect someone who just walked by your house to say, oh, your air conditioner's in the wrong place, because it might be the right place, depending on when it was put there.
But I wouldn't have thought to ask him about the AC at that point. I was doing the pavers, I guess.
But-
AC was
But can I
done
ask a
before.
question just on that? Sorry, just
Go ahead,
because I
Trustee
think.
Dodd.
Huh? Can I just
Yes,
ask a
of course.
follow-up question? So I think we're just trying to really understand the your process of how this came about or whatever. So I understand that somebody obviously identified it. So then the process is to come out and complete a permit. And if you look at the permit application and the movement, I realize that the movement of the AC had already occurred, but it was part of this project. Is that true? Part of this, because you were repaving the patio and the air conditioner at that time was in the middle of the patio.
It
True?
broke,
Right.
it broke before we actually were having the patio. So the AC
Okay.
broke. It was 25 years old. It was probably this high.
Okay.
I mean, it was and it broke. So when she called to have a new one put out, that's when the guy suggested to be more efficient, put it around the side of the house, because the air conditioner guy knew we were going to put in a new patio. We told him.
Yeah, because then it made sense to us. If we are going to replace the paver patios, they probably, if they're going to remove that AC, put it on the side, because they said that they
Right,
could.
because we brought that up because where the AC was, they would have had to then move it again to get the old bricks out underneath, level
Right.
it, prepare it for the new. The AC
So
was
how much
done.
time transpired between you? I'm just trying to understand
When was
because
that
I think
permit pulled? I guess?
so. When you
What date
no,
does
when
that
you.
say?
August
When the
of 2012.
decision was to move the air conditioner because the air conditioner broke and you obviously needed AC because it was probably a really hot day because it only breaks when it's hot. Did you already have plans in place to replace the patio?
The plans I would have said would have been there, but I don't think it was started yet.
I don't know if we even talked to people, got quotes yet.
I think we did.
I don't know.
And the reason why I was asking the question is just because, you know, we try to make these we try to make the permit process, either you can request help when you come to the desk and they'll kind of walk through with you the kinds of things you're trying to do, which sounds like you didn't do, or we try to make it kind of clear on the actual permit process. And on the permit process, if you look at the permit that you completed, it talks about what are the things you requested, and listed on that permit is air conditioner. And that's done to make sure people know the kinds of things you might need a permit for. And so that's why I was kind of asking the question. It'd be very hard, as you're completing this, to not see that.
Well, the AC would have been done before that, and North Star, I would assumed again, would have taken care of that. And so we learned that's definitely not
Well,
the case.
but, okay, so in 2012, you have an inspector who happens upon your patio under construction, says, hey, you know, you need a permit for that work. And so you go get the permit, but there's other work, I mean, because we asked the staff for a full history of the work that was done in this. I mean, again, if this is incorrect, please correct me, but according to the staff's memo to us, the patio work, the moving of the AC and the grill island we're talking about, the grill pergola, which was stopped midway, you didn't go get a permit for. there's a pergola over 2 sliding glass doors that you didn't get a permit for, and there's a fire pit that you didn't get a permit for. So all of those items would have required a permit, and so you had this big to-do about the permit process. But what I'm struggling with is that, like, if I had something like that happen, like, oh, geez, I needed a permit, I didn't know it. When I was working on my next project, I would at least go to the village website or call someone and say, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. Do I need a permit? And it doesn't sound like you did any of that, including the project, the project that was halted this last time, that was like right over the grill and on the patio. So I think that's what I'm struggling with, is like, you know, and so then you're putting us in the situation of, and let me ask you this question, make your case. But if we approve this, what exactly is it that we don't approve when someone didn't get their permits and didn't get, because we've also got a neighbor that's raised concerns. It's one thing if your neighbor came and said, oh, hey, I love it, it's beautiful, it's perfect, but that's not what your neighbor said. So if we approve this, what have to be the fact set that we wouldn't approve something? This is a very bad set of facts. So, you know, that's what I'm struggling with.
I mean, the fire pit was done at the same time as everything else, so it wasn't done after the fact, as the backyard and all that was there. In terms of the pergola, you know, we should have done more research on it. I mean, and looked it up. I mean, it wasn't a full pergola over the table, I guess. I mean, I don't know what we were thinking, and all we can say is, you know, we're sorry.
I mean, for the ones over the door, they were existing. We probably put new ones, so
Yeah,
it wasn't.
we shouldn't have done the grill one.
Mr. President?
Yes, Joe.
So we have a new
Trustee
process
Kuzma.
in place. Will we be hearing from the neighbor tonight?
Yes, of course. Yes.
I have a question. It might be for Mr. Adler. But I'm wondering if, I mean, as backyard structures are becoming more popular, built-in grills, fire pits, those kinds of things, are they labeled out in our permits now? I mean, there is no box for fire pit. There is no box for built-in grill. There's no box for, you know, pony wall or knee wall or whatever those called. You know, like if you had a built-in. So I'm just curious, you know, as those are becoming more popular, are we spelling that out any better in our permits?
Mr. Adler, you want to come up and?
I can't answer off the top of my head whether there is in the current permit a checkbox for an outdoor kitchenette or a grill island. I mean, there's the permit is a certain size, and there's already a lot of information. In the allowable encroachment section of the zoning code, outdoor kitchenettes, these sorts of grill islands are called out as allowable encroachments if they're entirely within the required rear yard. So if somebody knew to get a permit and was going to research it, they would be able to relatively easily see by looking at the encroachment table to be able to have a grill island or a kitchenette like this 3 feet away from the property line. It would have to be located entirely within the required rear yard. But I can't tell you if something like kitchenette islands or grill islands are listed specifically in our permit application off the top of my head. My guess, it probably didn't expand much from the permit that's in here, just because of lack of space to really to do that.
I have a follow-up question for Mr. Adler. What can you tell us about the responsibility of the contractors who did this work, their knowledge of our permit process, their requirements, and the implications of their actions in a case like this?
Sure. I'm not familiar by name with these contractors, so I'm not able to tell you if there was a history of them pulling permits or, to the contrary, a history not pulling
bigger picture
permits
in general.
You know, it's the village belief that any contractor that's doing any sort of work in the village should have a fairly good understanding of what requires a permit. Most contractors, I believe, would understand that if you're going to remove a a patio, even if you're going to replace it in the same location, you need a permit. There's some towns that, even with an exact replacement, I'm pretty sure you might run into problem. That's not necessarily the case in Wilmette. If it's an exact replacement, it's a relatively easy process, and I think that's what we saw here. The department understood was this was an exact replacement, meaning it's going to be the same size, it's going to be the same elevation, so there's no concern about how water is going to drain across the property or that's going to be impacted by structures that are built up that might block that water, so there's no grading or drainage review. But it's our hope and our belief that the contractor should know what the regulations are, especially air conditioner contractors. I mean, the big ones, they know. The ones who do a lot of work, absolutely they know. Are there times in which they might do work without a permit? It wouldn't surprise me. We, on occasion, catch people who do a lot of work in the village doing something without a permit. Fortunately, most of the time it ends up being conforming, and then it doesn't come before you or the Zoning Board of Appeals. But again, it's our belief that if you're doing work in the village, you should have a contractor doing work. You should have a good understanding of what requires a permit and what doesn't.
Is it also true that currently we do not have a process by which we go back to the contractors who violate the rules and punish is the wrong word, but there's implications to.
I mean,
consequences.
Right. The consequences would be through issuing a citation and going to court and getting a fine levied. What we typically find, if the homeowner comes in and applies for the permit and it's conforming and we could issue the permit, it doesn't make sense to bring somebody to court right now because it'll just get dismissed, and it's actually going to cost the village more time and money to actually do that than we might punish the contractors. Not to say we haven't done it. Sometimes just getting a contractor into court, and time is money, helps them understand the seriousness of pulling permits.
So I would like to suggest that, and I've had some preliminary discussions with staff, that we take this up as an important issue and that we figure out a way of exacting consequences on some of these contractors who are licensed in our village, potentially to pull those licenses or to have other implications of their bad acting, other than just let's try it without the permit and see if we get caught. You know,
Right.
that can't be something that persists here in the village.
Well, and this is a perfect example because it's an installation that now has taken a lot of, obviously, the zoning board's time and the village board's time, and
as well as the residents' time.
And the residents' time,
like
if the contractor understood where this would be conforming, either pushing it 5 feet to the north so it falls entirely within the rear yard where 3 feet from the property line would be okay, or to move it 3 further feet away from the side lot line in its current location. Obviously, as it relates to that, we wouldn't be here. We would have issued most likely a surcharge, but that surcharge is minimal.
Yeah, I think that there should be some pushback by the contractor who says, no, even I'm not saying that you did suggest this, but even if a resident says, no, I don't want to get a permit, I don't want to incur the cost or the time, that contractor says, no, I can't do that because I make too much money in Wilmette and I'm going to lose my license to work here.
So that seems like something the land use committee could cover. Add that to your plate. So yeah,
Yeah, I would like to agree with that. This reminds me of the Lawndale case where, the contractor just did something that flew in the face of what common practice was. So even if it's not to the level of enforcement yet, just the collection of that information is a good first step. And I agree with Trustee Leonard's thought process on this.
So, Mr. Stein, you wanted to add
back
something?
to this. I agree with Trustee Leonard, and we did have a conversation about this, but back to this specific issue, it's important to realize that there's dual responsibility and dual liability when it comes to a contractor performing the work who's not licensed or doing things in violation of our codes, but also the entity or the person that's receiving the benefit. So there is still a responsibility and liability on the property owner. And I think for this particular case, that's something we should also keep in mind.
But when people apply for a permit for the air conditioner replacement or whatever, do they, when they come in and apply, do they say, I'm going to use this contractor?
Yeah.
So we know.
Right.
Why not just so we know North Star did it without a permit, put them in a penalty box. And so when they come in and apply and say, North Star, your permit fee is double because they violated our rule.
We'll leave that not for tonight, but for the land use committee
And then
to
North
figure
Star,
out.
the next time they decide to do it, and North Star is known.
Yeah,
they do things very fast, and I've seen them do it before. And I am going to publicly, because I caught them. It impacted my house. And had I not known what I know about the village and the zoning, they would have put an air conditioner right on my property line. And it was actually there, and I made them move it back and go get the permit. Now I did it differently. I handled it with the neighbor, and the neighbor is unaware. Put North Star in a penalty box. And then next time they do it, try and do it without a permit, they're going to realize I'm going to have to pay double the fee, or it's going to come out of their pocket. I'm sure they came to your house on a hot day in July of 2012, and
she was pregnant, 8 months pregnant. So the guy said, "I can move it here," and she said, "Sure."
right. And 2 hours later, you're cool.
Yeah.
So take it to the land use.
So I was just going to ask a couple of follow-up questions to you, John. So, and it's building on this a little bit, but are requirements around an air conditioner and the location of them, or the location of a grill with, is that typical of other neighboring communities? I mean, and then I'm asking because
Right.
I mean, would most contractors who work in the North Shore area understand, that these things around, an air conditioner in the setbacks, putting in a permanent grill,
The air conditioner, they definitely should. Putting in a grill island or a kitchenette, that's a relatively recent, I don't want to say footnote, but it's something that 20 years ago people weren't typically doing.
Mm-hmm.
So that might be, there's probably communities out there that don't have it addressed in their zoning code.
But they should check anyways.
Right.
I know, I understand
that's
that.
the,
I
that's the
understand. So
thing.
then I have one other question. Sorry. So, and this is, so a resident comes in and gets a permit, and so in this situation, they came in and got a permit, and then somebody goes out and inspects that. And I'm kind of building on something that the somebody goes out and inspects that and is looking at the permit and is trying to understand the work there. So I'm trying to understand how our inspector would identify discrepancies between the permit and what's happening on the property.
Sure. The first inspection that was done when engineering code enforcement caught it. So I think when they went out there was a base that was down. So my guess is there was nothing that was extending above grade at that point. So, and I don't, obviously I wasn't privy to the conversation between code enforcement and the property owner. But typically they would be told is you have to go in and get a permit. If this is an exact replacement, the process is relatively easy. And in this case, we didn't even surcharge because, again, if somebody's replacing exactly what they have in kind, it's a permit we could get out the door really over the counter. And I think that's...
But was that what happened here?
No.
Okay.
I think that's part of the problem. The engineering inspector was out there, doesn't know what's going above grade, is told that this is going to be an exact replacement. We issue the permit for the exact replacement. We know that another inspector went and did a final inspection, and that was our building inspector. My guess is, and I'm not saying what the owner is saying is untrue, but this is an inspector, if he saw a fire pit and a grill island where the permit said it was just an exact replacement, unless for some reason he believed those areas were existing and not part of the work that was permitted, I believe he would typically bring that to staff's attention so that then we could ask for more information and make sure that's conforming. But again, this is 5-6 years ago, and I don't know what the exact.
Go ahead.
What transpired.
I think what I'm trying to understand is when the final inspection is done by somebody on our staff and they see that what was done doesn't match the permit, why isn't that red flag raised at that time? I don't understand.
I don't know what he saw. I don't know if that's I don't know what the facts are. My guess is if he went out there and, again, he saw a permit that said exact replacement, I guess he could have thought that those items were existing
were already
before.
there, and that the patio was replaced and the items
could be,
were there.
He didn't fill out the application. The application says something, and ultimately what was done was it was done different than what the application stated. And then the air conditioner, not obviously, but as I mentioned before, the inspector's not even looking at the air conditioner at that point. Yeah, right.
I just have a question for the applicant. You were talking about how you would be willing to not go ahead with the pergola. What exactly would you do, not do? What would you take down? Because there are those things kind of sticking up there now. Would you take those
Yeah, so
down?
right now it's just the poles that are in there. So I would just cut them at ground level and put the one brick back on the one side and the dirt on the other side. I mean, that's...
Okay, so that would, the end result would be that the grill island would be where it has been for the last 5 years.
Yeah, in the same
That's
way,
where it
right.
is. And then what ultimately happened with the pergolas or the whatever above the doors? Are those?
So we got permits for those. So those are conforming. They're to...
And they're the same way they were before, and that is not a variance
Yes.
anyway. Okay, very good, thank you.
More questions for the applicant? Any more questions for Mr. Adler? And then I'll open it up for comments from the public. Okay, but before I open it up, so have a seat for a moment. Before I open it up for comments from the public, as is my tradition with the student government students, 1 hour of village board meeting is punishment enough. So if you would like to be excused, the student government people here, thank you for coming out tonight. You've been here since 6:45, and that's more than enough work on our student government. So we'll let them clear the room before we continue here.
Put them on the spot that they had a public comment.
Right. Okay, so I will now ask if there's anyone here in the audience who would like to be heard on this matter. Yes, ma'am, please approach the podium.
Hi there. My name is Barbara Perlman. I live at 3736 Lake, which is directly west and right next door to the applicant. Is it possible for me to close this so I could put down some materials here?
The computer? Yeah.
Just close it? That has nothing to do with your screen, I assume. Well,
It does, but that's okay.
okay.
We'll go to the logo.
For full disclosure, I probably should let you know that I am a 50-year veteran of the architectural design and build industry. I started out many, many years ago as an interior architect, presently licensed with the state of Illinois through 2019, and I have been licensed since the inception of interior design regulation by the state of Illinois. I'm a member of ASID, the American Society of Interior Designers. I've served on the board for the Illinois chapter, and I'm also a former Industry Foundation member of ASID. I've served before I retired as a trustee and a board member for the International Society of Interior Designers, and have a lot of experience with code building and that sort of thing. I have every permit for that property, if you'd like to.
We have them as well. Staff pulled them for us. And we did review the materials that you provided previously to the zoning board, both there were multiple emails and
It looked
as
like
well
you
as all the
did.
permits. So
So I do watch Channel 6 on Tuesday nights when you're here, and I know there's probably a time limit to this tonight, so I'll be very, very brief. Try to do an elevator brief, if I may. But in watching these programs over the years, I've seen you, Mr. President, focus on finding a fact, which you've attempted to do tonight. And with the variance requests that were done by this particular party, it's a series of 3 illegal build-outs, and anyone viewing tonight now sees what happens when you illegally build without permits and how you get caught in no permit quicksand. And the more you talk and the more you say, sort of tells its own story. These 3 build-outs are part of a series of many, many illegal builds with no permits on this property, which I brought to the attention of zoning. But these 3 in particular really affect me. And when the applicants say that I didn't complain, if you had seen the zoning board presentation that was done, that was in the context of A through F in the standards for variation. And they asked me how it affected me. It didn't affect my air. It doesn't affect the character of Wilmette, the fact that there's doing these build-outs. The fact of the matter is we're right on the golf course. Beautiful, beautiful property, no obstruction whatsoever. There isn't even a rock out of place. There was nothing on this property before these people bought the property, and all the build-outs have been done by them over a period of years. So I wanted to stress that point. And the way it affects me is the same way it affects you and the same way it affected the zoning board. We were all cut out of the process. None of us had a chance to go through this and go through the normal procedures because they were all circumvented for whatever reason. There was never an opportunity to minimize. There was never an opportunity to bring these builds within the conformance of our zoning ordinance. So as a Wilmette resident, and I'm sure there are people watching tonight that feel the same way, we have a reasonable expectation that our neighbors are not going to be illegally building on their property. But when they do, and when those illegal builds come to light, especially in a forum like this, I have a reasonable expectation then also that our village board is going to enforce Wilmette's ordinance. And it's as simple as that. None of these meet, not one single build-out meets any of the standards for variance, especially A, B, C, or D. I also wanted to mention one other thing. The applicants have said that I never complained, and I have to tell you that I did complain, and that's why we're here tonight. And I complained over many years, but I didn't use that as an argument in zoning because I felt that as one person, there was no one to corroborate or to collaborate what I was saying. And we have an applicant here with 2 people. So I didn't use that argument. And despite that, it was still voted down. It's not up to an unsuspecting neighbor ever to complain. It's up to each property owner to comply and conform. The burden is always on the property owner. The burden is listed on page 291, Article 17, Nonconforming, Section 17.2, General Standards of Applicability. B, burden is on the property owner. And it starts out with just 3 words. And those 3 words are in all cases. Not sometimes, not once in a while, but in all cases, the burden is on the property owner for legality. So whether a neighbor happens to complain 5 minutes later, you know how fast you can move an air conditioner. An air conditioner, you just cut the feeds, pick it up, put it over here. That could happen when you're out at the grocery store. And you come home and the rest of the installation is done inside. You know, the leads are done in the house. So whether a neighbor finds out 5 weeks, 5 days, 5 months, 5 years later, where it exactly is the same crosswords, rows that we're at tonight. Sometimes the neighbor doesn't really know what's going on. I mean, you might have a nice relationship with your neighbor. These are wonderful, wonderful neighbors. They just have this little problem that they like to do little illegal build-outs in their yard, but they're lovely, lovely people. And there's a hesitancy for the neighbor because, I don't know, your kids might play with their kids. You really don't want to get, too involved in going down to City Hall. But when an applicant says that the neighbor didn't complain, it's an attempt to put the onus on the neighbor now instead of keeping it where it belongs on the applicant, on the property owner that should be conforming. And I'm sure as many people watching tonight will say, we don't want to be the zoning police. The neighbors should not have to be the zoning police. I just really have one question for all of you tonight. I'd just like to know, what is the real incentive for any resident in Wilmette, for anybody watching tonight, for this applicant, what's the incentive to stop illegal builds? I mean, just a question. I feel these 3 build-outs should be put back to their original location. I think all of this sets precedent for the village. Other people are going to be coming in here. Illegal builds really have to stop in Wilmette. And I ask you to please put an end, if possible, to illegal builds without permits in the village. Thank you.
Any questions?
I have a question.
Trustee Plunkett?
Sure. Ma'am, did you, if I understand you correctly, you did not complain about the air conditioner because you did not notice that it was where it was?
No, I did complain, and I want to tell you...
But I mean for 5 years.
No, I did complain when it was moved. I didn't come to Village Hall. I complained to them. And I didn't want to start a he said, she said here. But I was told nobody will ever find out if you don't tell. I said, aren't you afraid somebody's going to come out? And, but there's no point in getting into that. I did complain. It fell on deaf ears. But there are many, many build-outs in this yard and on this property. It's not just the 3 we're talking about tonight.
Well, we're just talking about what we're talking about tonight.
Well, exactly.
Okay.
But I bring that up just as background.
Okay, and I do want to clarify in terms of your enjoyment of your property.
Yes.
That at the zoning board you said that the air conditioner in its current location has not been a hindrance in terms of noise to you. Is that correct?
I was talking in zoning about air and about the ABCD. I guess it's E in the or F in the E or F in the standards for variation. I'll tell you a real quick little story about the air conditioner. There were absolutely no obstacles in that backyard. The air conditioner was picked up, moved to the side yard. It's about 2.7 feet, 2.8 feet from our property line. It was right under their dining room window, as they said. But guess where it is now? It's right next to my dining room window. And my backyard air conditioner is still in the backyard, and it's under my guest room window. But there are certain things that conform and certain things that don't conform. So it went for, and the other thing that's very interesting is this air conditioner with this great new sear and its tiny, small little size. I mean, if it's so quiet and it's so little, why wasn't it left in its conforming location? You know, to pick it up and move it right next to my dining room window isn't the answer.
Other questions?
I have a question. Can you just clarify for me, because I'm not quite understanding, why is it that you did go to the village hall now? Because
I'll tell you why. I would go to them as build-outs were being done, and I think you saw in my first letter to zoning, if you read it, that there were other things going on with water management on the property, in both the front yard and the backyard. There was a shed that was put up right next to the property line and just down from the air conditioner that was completely out of conformance. And with my background in code and as a designer, I went to them and I said, look, this really isn't working. You've got to take this down, move it, or whatever. Well, those were easier things to remedy. They were easier things to do. So they went ahead and admittedly, in the rebuttal letter that I sent to zoning, they said that they did do those things and they did move them back. This time I went to zoning because already over all these years, I mean, there's just one thing after another, and I look out my window and I see this pergola over the grill island.
So basically it was the presence of the pergola that prompted you to say, hey, I'm going to just...
To come to the village,
okay.
Yes, because it was so odd. And, you know, maybe somebody without a background in design and where you put things wouldn't have noticed. But now I look out and I see a pergola under construction. This is the end.
Okay. Yeah. You know, I think everybody has, you know, different things. There are things my neighbors have done that don't bother me at all, other things that do. So everybody, you know, has certain things that do or don't. But that's helpful to know that basically it was the side of that pergola that really...
So, you know, this grill island is a permanent stone brick structure. It is a dry stack. It's not mortared. These people presented a proposal, if they had to move the things back, that was, to a trained eye, frankly, not believable. Because we're talking about a dry stack structure that you unstack it, you pull out the grill, unstack a little more, you move it, you stack it back up, put the grill in, and then finish stacking it. It's a dry stack. It's a very easy deal. This man in his quote put down that his hourly was $55. At $55 to move the air conditioner for $3,500, mind you, and to move the grill was going to be $8,900. At $55 an hour, divide that by a 40-hour week. That would have meant it would take a month to move this back, which is completely unbelievable. It would have taken 2 men 2 weeks. It doesn't make sense.
Can I ask, you made a comment in you said our kids play with theirs. What did you mean by that?
Well, my kids are grown, but I'm just saying for any viewer or for yourself, your kids play with your neighbor's kids. You know, you have nice relationships with your neighbors. You don't want to rock the boat. I mean, you start something like this, I guarantee you, once you start coming to the Board of Trustees and the Zoning Board, these people aren't so anxious to, you know, keep a relationship going. We used to wave and just have a lovely time with one another, and they're not talking to me now. I mean, you know, it's really a shame.
I think it was in the context of saying, you know...
No, so neighborly, like how to broach these situations. Got it. I misheard you on that one thing, so just wanted to clarify.
Other questions? Okay.
Thank you very
much. Ma'am. All right, the applicant, you have the floor again. You can have the final word, and if the trustees have any further questions for the applicant. No? Okay. All right, so is there anyone else who would like to be heard? I should have asked that first. Okay. So this is the second sort of difference. Before we just roll into discussion, I'm sorry, did I miss some?
No, but we're just reviewing just the AC. Is the pergola off the table now? So it's just the AC and the grill?
I believe they've withdrawn it. So, but and if we get to that point, we can have Trustee Leonard amend. He would amend his motion, or he would withdraw it and do another one or whatever.
We'll figure it out as it goes along.
All right.
I don't know where you guys are going.
So it's been moved and seconded. Normally we'd move into discussion, but in an attempt to sort of accelerate our reviews here, I guess I'll just ask for a straw poll at this point in time. You know, how many of the trustees think that, so we can guide the discussion better, how many of the trustees think that the standards have been met, and how many of the trustees think the standards haven't been met, and how many trustees aren't really sure? Okay, so I'll first ask, how many trustees think the standards have been met here and are inclined to approve it?
I want to just throw something out here, and I know that the zoning board discussed this, and that the zoning board felt that, you know, they had little leeway with those standards, and therefore wanted the village board to ultimately decide this because it was going to be more of a judgment call.
As the zoning board is known to do at times, right?
And that's understandable. I mean, that's their job. So, you know, you're asking if the standards have been met or not, but ultimately the question is, you know, how do we view this whole picture, and what are we going to be voting for?
I understand. So I could rephrase the question and say, how many people are inclined to support the request? And then how many are not inclined to support the request, and how many are unsure and would like to talk about it more?
You know, I just want to make one comment. If I'm reading correctly, I think I am, when it came before the zoning board, the request included the pergola, and now it does not include the pergola. So there is a change in scope from what the zoning board turned.
No, I think the motion has the pergola.
It does. Well, that's what she's saying. Did they vote it down because I don't want to speak for you, but if the pergola weren't in, would the zoning board may have come out with a different vote and just viewing the AC and the...
That wasn't my read of it either, but I don't know.
But, yeah, that's one thought on my mind. The other thing is, if it included the pergola and now it does not, it's not exactly the same thing, and that might...
Right, that might change people's mind as well.
Exactly.
I would answer your question. Had this come before us, had they wanted this plan and to move the air conditioner from the rear to where it is today, as well as build the grill, I would have probably found that it did not meet the standards of review and said no to minimize the variations. And that's where I stand today. So had it been 2012, I would have voted no.
And I would agree with you that everybody wants their air conditioner not to be in the back of their house.
Right.
We do have the rules. They do exist for a reason. It is an imposition potentially on a neighbor. And by the way, even the quietest ones, because we've got a brand new one, and it's right before a kitchen window, and I hear it when it goes on. And that's why we put them in the back. And so I would not have been inclined to support that. Now, I understand what the applicant's saying, that in the event that if you would have told us our grill had to be 3 foot back, we wouldn't have come and asked for a variance. But I wouldn't have supported the air conditioner. And I was, frankly, for the record, I was surprised that there were members of the zoning board that suggested that that was okay, because I think that's completely inconsistent with how we view these things.
And I think that's going to go, for me, the big issue is, had they come before us in 2012 and followed our process, would we not be here today? Because community development would have said, you can't do this, here's what the code, and they would have built it in code. And I think that's what they told us tonight is, had they known, they wouldn't have done this. We're never going to know.
Thoughts, people? I mean, we can just, what I don't want to do is just go around the horn. I just want, as people want to add something, they can add something to the discussion. Trustee Leonard.
For me, I think that there's the bigger picture issue here. I mean, it's pretty clear that at least in my mind, that the standards have not been met. The issue, as I see it, and it makes me harken back to our conversation about the front yard patio several meetings ago, and I was concerned about that because we kind of let that go because we were feeling sympathetic or whatever.
Well, no, actually, I think it was different. I think there wasn't a neighbor complaining, and it wasn't, in my mind, at least when I voted, it wasn't like, oh, I don't care. It was like this wasn't a material thing, and it wasn't having a negative impact on the neighbor. That I think is a big difference.
Restrictions on there.
Right, and you put some restrictions on the impervious surface element.
True, but I hearken to what Ms. Perlman said, is that it's really shouldn't be the burden of the neighbor to be the factor by which we enforce our rules. And I think that was well said, and I think we need to be we owe it to our community to enforce these rules, and it shouldn't be a complaining neighbor, and it shouldn't be time between installation and getting caught. You know, I really think that these rules are here for a reason. They were well thought out, and I think that we need to send a message to the community that you really need to pull a permit. And if you don't, there's going to be stuff that happens. And it shouldn't be based on whether we're feeling sympathetic or non-sympathetic. I mean, really, I think we need to be strict about it. So to me...
I agree with that, but I also, where I disagree, and I actually was a little disappointed in the neighbor policing, because I think policing is the wrong word, but neighbor advising. We do a lot of new construction. We do a lot of additions. People go through our process. We have a number of people that are involved. I have a number of people come up to me who are looking to build and ask, can I do this? What's the process? And quite honestly, my easy answer is call John.
Call John, right.
Call John.
Right.
And he does. And they get
Do you need a
right
permit?
direction. So I think it
Probably.
is part of our job as neighbors, especially if we have the experience, if we're experienced in zoning or this field, to try and advise. And even if we see people doing it, like I referenced my neighbor who probably was in a similar situation, needed a new air conditioner unit in the middle of summer, and it was there. It was just a quick call to the neighbor saying, you can't do this, just call the neighbor, call the village, and they got it in the right way. So I do think, I wouldn't use the neighborhood policing, but I think we are a community of neighbors, and how do we help that?
But I think what Steve's point was, even if the neighbors say it's okay, that doesn't mean we should say it's okay just because the neighbors say it's okay, and we shouldn't say no just because the neighbors say no.
And it also doesn't mean that the next neighbor won't find it offensive just because this neighbor is hard of hearing. You know, something like that. I mean, we have to police these things.
And had that neighbor not even said it, that's why I say I would have not supported this, even if the neighbor had come in and said, yeah, the air conditioner's not going to bother me, because then we're going to run into the issue. Everybody's going to want their air conditioner on the side.
Right, and then you put the burden on the neighbors. Like, you're not going to object to my variance, are you? You know? So, Trustee Dodd.
So I agree with what Trustee Leonard and Trustee Sullivan has said. Obviously, the standards of review have not been met. I think where I'm struggling is, and it's very difficult for us sitting up here to decide he says, she said, and what exactly happened, and, you know, should the residents have known or whatever. But I believe our processes should help support the residents here. I'm struggling with why our inspector who went out for the final inspection didn't see this. I'm struggling with that, and I think we need these permits, these things. There are subtleties, and I don't believe we can always expect our residents to remember it, which is why I agree that's why neighborly people bringing up is helpful in this. So I think what I'm struggling with here is, and at least something I'd like to think about going forward is, I think our final inspector should be making sure that the work was done matches the permit. And to help, I believe that possibly this should have at least been found 5 years ago, and I'm struggling with that. And maybe it's because I don't understand the permit process.
But the question is, okay, the permit says you did work on your patio. There's a fire pit here and there's a grill here. Those could have been done 20 years ago.
But if you read the permit, it says replacing the existing patio, and the fire pit's right in the middle. They would have had to have redone that.
I don't know. I wasn't in the backyard to see it.
Well,
was it? I mean,
yeah,
were the things around it? Was it on top? You know, we don't know those facts.
Well, we have a picture of it. I'm not following. I don't think I'm answering.
There was no inspector that went out and did an actual inspection.
Well, that's what I was asking. That's what I guess I misunderstood when I was asking John Adler the question. I thought that, and maybe this is just I don't understand the permit process, but I thought, somebody found them and came in, and then they put in a permit, and they submitted a permit. And then there was a final inspection, and a final inspector went out. And that's, I think, what I'm trying to understand is I think that final inspector, and maybe we don't, can't fix that today, but I think that's a problem.
I think jumping to the conclusion that the inspector who went out, and there was a final inspector, missed something, we don't know if that's true. We don't know if, the applicant says that the grill was installed and the fire pit was installed.
We don't know that was really
I don't know. The inspector who went out there, I'm fairly confident would have raised it. The other point is, we would have been dealing with this 5 years ago as a variation, because when the inspector goes out for a final, it's done. The grill island's in, everything's been completed. And so we would have been, if let's just say, it was missed by the inspector or the applicant came forward at that time, they would have had to get a variation 5 years ago, and it wouldn't be this village board who would be having the discussion, but the discussion would be had. Again, the permit did not show, call out a grill island. It did not call out a fire pit. Again, I don't know what the inspector saw when he went out and did his inspection. I'm not saying that the applicants.
We just don't.
I just don't know. Right.
If you look at page 253 of the PDF,
I'm looking at it right now, yeah.
I mean, I'm not so sure, and 254 shows a grill island. I'm not so sure that the grill island looks like it had to have been redone at the same time the patio, because it looks like the edge of the patio ends, at least in the one part in front of the grill island. So you could certainly have replaced the patio there without it touching the grill island. And it's just, Trustee Dodd, I completely agree with you that our inspectors should be as helpful and as thorough as they can be. But it's like saying, well, you didn't tell me my windows. Well, I wasn't there to see your windows. I was there to see your patio. And is it the grill island? Is it the fire pit? Where does the patio start and the fire pit end? Because that's on the other end of the patio, too.
And the air conditioner wasn't even part of it.
Right. The air conditioner definitely wasn't.
I understand the air conditioner. That's an easy,
in terms of comments, I have a big issue with the fact that this was 5.5 to 6 years ago. I really do. I mean, I feel like at some point, are we going to go back and, start policing people that didn't get permits? Because, I mean, I don't know. The length of time that this has gone on and nobody, has come before the board, has drawn the attention. I appreciate that the pergola is the most noticeable thing here, but even the neighbor said that the pergola did not bother her. She said that the air conditioner was not a hindrance, nor was the grill island. And I don't think that the standards have been met. I don't think at the time we would have approved this, but, I mean, this is a long time past. And are we really going to be policing our residents and saying, did you do this 5, 6, 10 years ago? I don't know.
I think
that's a different.
I think there's a different issue between policing and reacting to a situation. And here we have it in front of us that there was a violation and they didn't get caught. I mean, it's not like, that's really all that happened is they just didn't get caught. That's what the time frame was. I would never suggest that we spend our efforts inspecting everyone's backyards to see if there's any violations. But if it does come to our attention, it's on our agenda, and we have to look at it, I don't think it's relevant that it's been a period of time.
Well, other things have statutes of limitations. I mean, at what point do we?
Well, just so you know, there is no statute of limitations.
I know we don't have
well,
here.
Just so the rest of the board's clear, there are no statute of limitations on a municipal ordinance violation like this. So every day that there's a violation, every day going forward is its own separate violation. So yesterday was one, 2 days ago was one, 5 years ago was one.
What would have happened had they sold the house and it was a new homeowner?
It still runs with the property. It doesn't
Would have
necessarily
been
run
with the
with
new
the owner.
homeowner.
Yep.
It would have been in front of us. And
The new homeowner would have a cause of action against the previous owner, but as far as the municipality is concerned, it still is a violation.
It would come up in an inspection.
Right. Yeah.
It might have.
It might have. Yeah.
Should have.
Could we make a suggestion that possibly the resident and their neighbor go back and talk through this and see if there's something they could compromise on?
Look, I think that's a great suggestion. I don't know if that prevents us from calling the question tonight and if, people can, we can certainly have a motion to table and let them come back. And if you want to make such a motion, we can vote on it. But
I'm kind of feeling the way Trustee Dodd is, and here's why. Reading through this, it sounds as though you guys have been neighbors for a while. You've had some things, you've worked things out. But it seems like the thing that was like the final straw was that pergola, but you've agreed to take it out. Seems to me that you guys could continue to talk and see if you can work things out. You know, that's the way it is with neighbors. I mean, we did something like that with our neighbors with the fence. We discussed with them, and we each did 50% to get the fence the way it needed to be, and we worked things out, and it was good. But I could be interested in that sort of a solution.
So, unfortunately, it would be my opinion that her neighbor's agreement doesn't necessarily, stop the law from being.
Because it's still the land.
It's still. Not only that. I understand it may not be an impact upon her. They may agree upon something, but that's not how we do our zoning. The zoning code does not pay what our neighbors allow. So, I think someone earlier made a comment. What about a subsequent homeowner?
Yeah,
when they have
I
an
guess
air
that's
conditioning,
true.
they have a fire pit, a smoke going into
or
the
you
backyard.
you also end up putting neighbors in bad positions where one neighbor wants to do something that's outrageous, and they go to the neighbor next door and say, "You're not going to complain, are you?" But that's outrageous. But yeah, but I won't be able to get it done if you complain. Yeah.
Right. So it's.
So if I understand that, then, so is our option tonight to decide, do we either approve the grill and the air conditioners that they're in there?
Yes.
Or we make them conform?
Correct.
And move them?
Or remove them or replace them in a different location, correct. And along with which I would believe would probably be a fine in either case. Well, in the first case.
In the first case, that's where I was going to go. In the first case, if we say they stay here,
there should be
approving the
some
variance and there's some.
They have to pay a surcharge on
It
the
would
permit.
essentially be a settlement amount for not prosecuting this. That I believe my office and as well as the village manager's office would take up. However, if it is determined that this board does not want to allow it and basically deny the zoning variation, an enforcement action could begin if they're unwilling to comply with the law. But if they are willing to comply, of course, we would give them time to do so. And we know it's winter and it's difficult to do. So those are really the two options I believe that are before you.
Well, and the reason I asked that is my direction I would probably go on that would change, because what I read in the zoning minutes was the neighbor was fine with the air conditioner and grill. So that helps me say, okay, well, I might go one direction, but if that neighbor is saying, no, I want to move, that's a different, then I have to think differently. But in the zoning, she said they were okay. These two things weren't about it.
No, but the neighbor was here tonight saying she would like them restored. It's the same person, right?
I knew
yes. So, I think. Trustee Kurzman, any thoughts? You don't feel compelled. I'm trying to not make everybody.
I do not need to make any contributions right now.
Okay. Trustee, well, any other discussion? Again, I'm just trying to. I'm not going to go around the horn. So, now.
I just. Oh.
Well, I want everybody to have an opportunity to
Right.
speak, but.
I know in the past we've been sympathetic to things that have already been put into place and the cost it takes to remove them. And, we had the Lawndale, we had the front yard. We did put restrictions on the backyard. I don't know what kind of restriction you could put here. I mean, other than the fact that they got rid of the pergola and you can impose a fine. But I do think as a board that we have been sympathetic to mistakes and human error and, new residents coming in and relying on their contractors or their air conditioning people. And, we talk about rely on your neighbors. Well, to some extent they relied on a professional. And I think that a bit of sympathy might be in order there.
What I was suggesting earlier when I said could the two, neighbors talk is I think we're all struggling here a little bit, even though because of the time and I'm struggling, I'm just going to come back to just why we didn't identify it ourselves or whatever. That's a separate issue. So I'm wondering if we can compromise and maybe we could ask the applicant, what if we ask them to do one of the two? Because I think that this is really important that our residents do understand, and I appreciate the perspective that that the neighbor brought, which is, if we keep making exceptions for people not getting permits, then people won't get permits, and permits are in place for these things. So I think that's why this is a difficult case. So what if I'm just
So I will take your suggestion. Because I saw some heads nodding no.
Oh no, okay,
but would it matter to any of the trustees if this were separated? Like, do they have a different point of view on the grill or the air conditioner? Just, if it would matter, say it would matter, and we can talk about it. If it wouldn't matter, then say it wouldn't matter, and then we can move on. Trustee Leonard is saying it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter to Trustee Kurzman. Doesn't matter to me.
Okay.
Doesn't matter to Dan.
Then I think we have what we need to
I do like Trustee Dodd's suggestion, tabling it and seeing what the three of them can come up with what really works. Because now I am confused because there just seems to be a conflict of what was said at zoning and what was said tonight are two different things. And there's something has happened.
Well, we can call the neighbor back up if we want. I mean, that's my issue is going to be, so if the neighbor says, no, I want it moved, then the applicant can blame one person and one person alone for the issue. And I don't think that's fair, that you put the neighbor in that position.
I think that the neighbor was incredibly clear on her wishes. And I think for us to basically punt on this and let these neighbors work it out, I think we're putting Mrs. Perlman in a bad position. I think we're putting her in an impossible position. And she wasn't gray. She was black and white. She said, I'm qualified. There's been a violation of the rules. I don't tolerate that, and I'm here to talk about that, and I've come twice now. So I think for us to say, go back and negotiate, I think that's us not doing our job. I think we've got a tough decision here, and a decision that is going to clearly make the homeowners upset and cause them some level of cost. But I think imposing the solution on the neighbor, in my mind, is not the right thing to do.
And that neighbor's qualified, you said. I just want to you said she's qualified.
She presented her above and beyond qualifications.
I agree.
Certainly more qualified than I would be.
Well, look, I will entertain a motion to table if someone wants to make that motion and if there's a second.
I move to table.
Is there a second?
Second.
We'll second.
Okay, it's been seconded, moved and seconded. I don't think we need to discuss further.
Should discuss. I think we should do a roll call, though.
Roll call vote.
Trustee Wolf?
Aye.
Trustee Sullivan?
No.
Trustee Plunkett?
Aye.
Trustee Dodd?
Aye.
Trustee Kurzman?
No.
Trustee Leonard?
No.
President Blinsky?
No. Motion fails. Any further discussion? All right, so do we need to amend to take out the pergola? Do we want to amend for?
No, I think
we just vote on it.
I believe while they did withdraw it from their application, it still should be actually in the motion, and it should be however it's going to be. Now, if the motion is going to be to approve the pergola, then we can discuss. If its ultimate vote is going to be to approve the pergola, if it's going to be a negative vote, I think it should be in the record that it's to be removed. So either way, I think it's.
Well, but if we don't approve it, it's non-conforming,
Right.
so it's going to be removed.
Right.
But they did.
Okay.
I mean, they did say they would remove the pergola, so I think we should amend them. I mean, unless you've got Mr. Frenzer, you're looking at me like you have concerns.
Kind of concur with the attorney. I mean, you did snap in a written withdrawal. There's been an
Right.
oral. If we're going to go to court to enforce a.
Exactly.
It's
So,
better
okay.
to have
It
an
should be
actual
part
vote
of the
that's-
record.
Okay, fine. Yeah, fine. So it is submitted as submitted per Corporation Counsel's
Can the
advice?
applicant come and formally withdraw that, though? I mean, they can orally withdraw that, correct?
If they wish to do that and orally withdraw it and confirm that it's going to be withdrawn and it's in the minutes, and it's no longer part of the application, then that's
Right,
fine.
because what you're saying is they offered to remove it as opposed
Yes, it's
to
not-
confirming that it would be removed.
Right, nothing has been confirmed, there's been nothing
Yeah,
in
I think
writing.
we should
There's been
clarify
no
that,
amendment to the
'cause it's
application, no oral amendment to the application.
I confirm that I am removing the pergola from our current request.
And from your yard.
And from my
Yes,
yard.
right.
Okay, and do you have a time frame in which that will be done?
Aye.
I'll pull the stalls out this weekend and chop it down.
Okay. Okay, so.
Okay,
So at least now we understand that, just for the record, it's very clear that the application and the request for the pergola has been removed. The pergola has been installed or partially installed, but will be removed by the weekend. We can give them 2 weeks.
We can give them a few weeks, yeah.
Two weeks to do so. So if that is the case, then it'd be a motion to amend would be fine, because it's in the record by the applicant.
Can I just clarify one thing about the air conditioner? If we vote that it has to be moved, where does it have to be moved to, or would that be addressed through the permit process?
To a conforming location. Right?
To a conforming location to be addressed with staff through the permit process, correct?
Mr. Adler's nodding his head, yes. Okay, so Trustee Leonard,
I'm not sure exactly what.
So at this point, why don't we withdraw the motion?
Okay,
the motion and I'm assuming the second will be withdrawn. I don't know who did that.
I'm willing to withdraw my motion.
Who was the second?
Julie. Oh, okay, I'll withdraw my second.
So now it would be a motion to approve the application as amended.
Okay.
How
So
about
I'd like to move to approve item number 6.11 as amended, Zoning Board of Appeals Report Case 2018-Z-02, 3730 Lake Avenue.
okay, so it's been moved as amended. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, so it's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion before we call the question?
Could you just clarify how many votes are needed?
Yes, I will do that. This comes with a negative recommendation from the Zoning Board of Appeals, so it needs 5 votes tonight to overturn the recommendation of the Zoning Board. And again, an affirmative vote is a vote to overturn the Zoning Board of Appeals' negative recommendation.
So I have a question.
Yes.
Now that the pergola has been removed, is that a material change that they could withdraw or this could be withdrawn, they can go before the zoning board again and ask just about the air conditioner and the grill for a variance?
So, Mr. Adler, and Mr. Stein, it's a good question that Trustee Plunkett raises. So, they could withdraw this right now if they wanted to.
They can
Yes or
withdraw
no?
the application and refile a new one. It would require a new notice period. However, the village board, you can refer it back. It still requires a new notice period, so it's essentially no different than doing it the other way. So in my opinion, that it doesn't necessarily, it is somewhat of a material change, but this board has to determine it's a material change, and you can, as a board, send it back to zoning for further review.
Well, if we, that's a different, voting to remand it to zoning is different than voting on the request. Correct. Right, so if we vote no on the request, that's not the equivalent of remanding.
Right, I'm sorry. Yeah.
But Mr. Adler, from the applicant's point of view, what's the difference? If we vote no, they can't refile the request, and now the request doesn't include the pergola.
Right. If you vote no, the reality is the grill island and air conditioned unit would have to be moved to a conforming location. If it would be remanded to the zoning board for further consideration because of the change to the request, and if they were able to get 4 positive votes at the zoning board, then they would need 4 positive votes from the village board to approve that revised request.
So I have a question. I'm sorry. Just
go ahead.
Can I ask a question to you, John? Because maybe then we would like the applicant to come back up. So if we make a vote and it's not and it's not approved, so then they'd have to go back and move the air conditioner and the fireplace and the grill to a conforming location. If they could they come back and move and only recommend moving the air conditioner and request a variance for the grill? Would we not allow them to do that?
That's probably not material. I would say that.
So they'd have to move both to a conforming.
If they wanted to separate it, they should do so, like they did with the pergola.
So then I would just wonder if we want to ask the applicant, given where we are, whether they'd like. Can they request to table this or no?
Essentially, it's the village board's decision whether or
Okay,
not you do not have enough information to make a decision today, or you want further investigation done by the zoning board.
Right.
That's why I was kind of going with the remand.
They could withdraw it based on the pergola change. They could just say, you know what, now that we've changed the pergola, let's go back and.
The problem is that they would draw it, they would have to file a new application with the zoning board.
Right.
If they're failure to do that, they are in violation and it's not stayed, and we would be now compelled essentially to begin an investigation and a violation action.
Right, but they could withdraw it tonight and get back on the zoning board's case tomorrow.
Yeah. Well, not
Well,
tomorrow,
but
On the two things, or they could figure out what they want to do and consult with an expert that says, here's what we should do. And
before we make the applicant do all that work, are there 4 votes? Okay, so let's say they do the work and the zoning board agrees with them now. I'm still a no vote on both. And are there 4 votes to the positive? Because what I don't want to have happen is they go to the zoning board, the zoning board says yes or no, they come to us and we say no anyways, because that's just wasting their time. So the question is, are there 4 or 5 votes to the positive for any of these things ex the pergola? I mean, otherwise we're creating process and we're going to end up in exactly the same spot. Maybe if the zoning board says yes, which by the way, it was 6-1 no. Maybe if the zoning board says yes, we only need 4 votes. Right now, by my count, there isn't even a majority in the best case, and I'm not sure those who voted to table are necessarily yes votes if the question is called. So you follow what I'm saying?
It was a positive, though. They didn't vote it out by task. It was, when reading the minutes, it was very positive on the air conditioners.
Right, but I'm still a no
I know
on
you
that.
are, but they were supportive of the air conditioners.
No, like 2 of the members of the board were, 2 of them were against and 2 of them were for, is the way I read it.
Yeah.
So
They could pull the grill and just come before us on the air conditioner. They could come before us on both of them still.
But again, I just want to make sure we don't suggest a path for the resident, and then they get disappointed anyways. Because then we've wasted another month of time and another zoning board meeting and another village board meeting to get to the same answer. So I'm asking the board for some guidance.
Although
does it matter?
If I may, I think it's up to the resident. You can do a straw poll of the board, and we present that to the resident and say, okay, right now, it's not going to happen, but I think it's their choice to maybe try it again. And if they think, no, this is just a waste of our time, it's going to be futile, over and done with.
Well, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to give them the guidance for that. I don't want by, remand it, go to the zoning board, now they'll say yes, and we'll say yes too. I don't want them to think that, because they don't do these all the time like we do. So I'm asking the board, do we think we're wasting the residents' time by suggesting they go back to the zoning board to try to get these approved and then come back to us with either the air conditioner or the grill?
Yes.
We're wasting their time.
Yes.
Trustee Leonard says we're wasting their time. I say we're wasting their time.
I'm more sympathetic.
I understand.
So
I don't think we're wasting our time because it's not going to get them conforming anyways. They can't move the air conditioner in February. Whatever.
No, I understand. But okay, so applicant, come on up. Just come on up so we can hear you in the microphone.
And he can saw down the things. He's not going to pull out the base units out
No,
of the
no,
frozen
right.
ground.
No, I understand.
So-
But so you've heard the debate and the discussion. A suggestion was made that with the pergola off, you could start over, go back to zoning, try to get zoning's approval. If you get zoning's approval, you only need 4 votes from this board.
Okay.
If today you don't have zoning's approval, you need 5 votes.
Okay.
But all I'm saying is 3 of us sort of said, honestly, it doesn't matter if zoning comes back with a yes, we're still a no. And so that's a process. It's another few weeks, maybe a month, another couple meetings, and you could end up in exactly the same spot you are here where it looks like you wouldn't get it approved. You can do that, but I just want to be clear that we're not saying go back to zoning and everything's cool and a month later
Right.
you're going to be all set.
Can we do them as 2 separate?
Split them up.
Can we apply as the AC as one and the grill as a second?
So in this situation, I still think it would be best to remand it back, not only for the applicant, but for the zoning board and for the time. There wouldn't be an extra fee or anything for the applicant to come through the zoning process again. There would be a notice period. However, we can give direction as the village board back to the zoning board saying they removed the pergola request. Does this now change the opinion, one or the other, or together? Do you agree now with the air conditioning? Do you agree now with the fire pit, or the grill, I'm sorry? Do you agree with the fire pit, or is it still too problematic? If we do the remand, it actually saves them, I think, money and time.
And based on what you just told them, there's 3 people saying no. They may, does this say, you know what, we have to make it conform, and they do it on their own, and they never come before us anyways. They just say, you know what, we're going to talk to whomever, your architect or some expert, and say, we'll just make it conforming and do it on our own and fix this on our own because we upset the neighbor and we want to comply.
Yeah,
so they know what you just said. They know
Okay, but again, I think it was important to say it.
No, I get
to
it.
lay it out there so that you understand the process, because just as, people don't do construction projects all the time, luckily they don't spend a lot of time in front of the zoning board unless you're an architect. And that was your chosen
years, and they
occupation.
clearly said they are not experts in this. So I can't say that they're lying and illegally building intentionally.
Right, but again.
So now I think they're much more educated on our process.
And with regards to separating them, we did a little straw poll of the board on whether that would matter, and we said no, it wouldn't. So, but just laying it all out there.
When you say it wouldn't, just to clarify, so it wouldn't matter, whereas you would maybe impose a fine on one to just leave and move the other. That's when you say, is that what you mean by separating wouldn't change your decision? Is that
because I think Trustee Dodd, I think you asked, can we break these up? And I asked the board, does it matter? And pretty much the answer was no. Okay. So, again, the only reason I'm going through all this rigmarole is because I want to make sure you're making an informed decision, and that so that if we see you in 6 weeks or 8 weeks, you're not really, really upset by us saying, well, why did they tell us to go do this if they were just going to say no anyways?
And that I just want to clarify what you had said. So you said that we can either start all over or you can go back to the zoning board?
Well, my suggestion was for this board to remand your case back to the zoning board. If you start all over,
what's that? Do we peer?
Yes, you would have to appear in front of them in either situation.
So the only difference is we don't have to send letters.
So you still have to send notice letter. You still have to send letters.
It's starting all over.
Starting all over. You're not doing essentially a new application.
They agree, we need one less vote here.
No, I get that part, but he was saying there's 2 processes. We can just send it back.
Now, there's 2 ways you could withdraw.
Oh.
And say we withdraw our request, or we could vote to send it to zoning instead of voting on it.
Okay.
I have a question. How can we ask them to withdraw their request? They can't withdraw their request because they have to do something. So they can't just withdraw their request.
Okay, so exactly. That's why I'm recommending that we remand. If they withdraw the request, I am then compelled to enforce the law because there's nothing staying an enforcement of this action. As long as they're involved in the process,
we as a board have to agree. So then we as a board have to agree to remand it back then.
Yes.
We can't leave it in there. Okay.
We would be
okay.
And again, that's a vote of the board.
But if we did remand it back, they still have a choice. They can go through the process again, or you can just move those things.
If it's remanded back, they can amend their application. They can say, okay, we're going to move this, not move that. And they're still part of the process, and they're still an active zoning application. Again, my hands are tied. If it's not, if there's nothing active, I have to enforce the law. And I have to then
that makes more sense.
Instruct them to remove the things. It'll be fine.
But if they filed for, if they redid so you take action, and I don't know the answers, and then they refile 2 days later.
I'd still be stayed. Yes, I wouldn't do anything as long as there's an active process. But I just think then they have to pay a new fee and go through the process.
So okay, I got it.
I mean, I think it'd be better to recommend it back to the board.
Remanding it back to the zoning board is a vote of this board.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Right. So it's not automatically remanded if...
No, you need a motion to remand it back and giving the direction to the zoning board of why you're remanding it back, which essentially is they remove the pergola. Does that change the zoning board's opinion? They have to redo the notice provisions again, give it to the neighbors in 250 feet, and then redo a hearing. Have to do a separate secondary hearing. Now, that can be a lot shorter, because I'm sure some of the testimony from the previous hearing would still stand in this hearing.
I mean, okay.
I don't think we should be remanding it.
My issue is, I don't think the facts are going to materially
Right.
change. I think the
I
pergola
agree.
is the issue here.
No, I agree.
So, but I will entertain a motion to remand if someone would like to make that motion.
Motion to remand to the zoning board.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
All right. Any discussion? We've sort of discussed this to death. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Trustee Wolf?
Aye.
Trustee Sullivan?
Aye.
Trustee Plunkett?
Aye.
Trustee Dodd?
Aye.
Trustee Kurzman?
No.
Trustee Leonard?
No.
President Blinsky?
No. Motion carries. The request has been remanded to the zoning board. So back to the zoning board.
Thank you.
Trustee Leonard.
All other items on consent.
Finance Committee, Trustee Sullivan.
One item is approved on consent.
Administration Committee, Trustee Dodd.
All items on consent?
Municipal Services, Trustee Wolf.
All items covered on consent.
Public Safety, Trustee Kurzman.
All items covered under consent.
Judiciary Committee, Trustee Plunkett.
All items on consent.
There are no reports from our special committees. There's no additional new business to discuss. Item 8 is pending matters referred to standing committees. There's no actions to take there. Item 9 is adjournment. May I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? We stand adjourned.
Total info. Weather. Total info. Sports.